San Francisco police had surviving witnesses, a composite sketch, and a name. In January 1976, detectives interviewed the man attached to that name. He denied involvement and they let him go. By then, 5 gay men had been found stabbed near Ocean Beach, Golden Gate Park, and the cliffs around Land's End. A 6th possible victim had been beaten to death. More than 50 years later, no one has been charged. The failure did not begin with a complete absence of clues. It began with a gap between 2 parts of the case. On one side were bodies left along the city's western edge. On the other were men who survived attacks inside Fox Plaza and described a young stranger who said he was a cartoonist. Police believed the same person was responsible. Proving that belief was another matter. The first thread appeared at about 1:30 in the morning on January 27, 1974. An anonymous man used a payphone near Ocean Beach to report what he believed was a dead person close to Ulloa Street. He gave the location, refused to identify himself, and vanished from the record. Officers found Gerald Cavanagh at the water's edge. He had been stabbed 17 times. His hands showed that he had tried to defend himself. The tide was moving in. Cavanagh was about 50 years old. He had been born in Montreal, served in the United States Army during the Second World War, and later worked as a furniture finisher and in a mattress factory. The surviving public record gives only fragments of his life, jobs, addresses, military service, and family connections. Before he became the first name in a serial murder file, he had already lived an entire life that the case documents barely preserve. His murder did not resemble a quick robbery. The wounds were to the front and back of his body, and the injuries to his hands showed that he had fought or tried to shield himself. Whoever attacked him stayed close and kept striking while Cavanagh resisted. The pattern of wounds showed a sustained, close-range attack, not a single sudden blow. Then there was the caller. He may have been an innocent passerby who feared becoming involved. He may have been someone who could not safely explain why he was near a nighttime meeting place used by gay men. Detectives also had to consider a third possibility. The caller knew where the body was because he had been present when Cavanagh died. The payphone stood near a public restroom across from Ulloa Street. Police released the recording decades later, but the voice has never been identified. For almost 5 months, Cavanagh's death stood alone. Then, on the morning of June 25, 1974, a woman walking near Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park saw a body beside a tree. The victim was 27-year-old Jae Stevens, known to friends and audiences as Jae. Jae Stevens sang, danced, told jokes, and performed in drag at clubs including the PS Lounge and Finocchio's, a famous North Beach venue. He had last been seen in the city's nightlife before he was found in a quiet section of the park, stabbed in the front and back. Decades later, his sister said the renewed attention to the case finally made her feel that somebody cared. For years, she had felt that nobody did. A second killing changed the first. Detectives now had 2 gay men attacked with knives and left in outdoor places where darkness could hide a private meeting as easily as a crime. The scenes were not identical, but they belonged to the same geography: the beaches, parkland, and paths along San Francisco's western edge. Police could no longer dismiss the resemblance. They still could not prove a series. 12 days later, they lost the luxury of calling it coincidence. On July 7, a woman walking her dog found 31-year-old Klaus Christmann on Ocean Beach, close to where Gerald Cavanagh had been discovered. Christmann was a German immigrant. He had a wife and children in Europe and had come to San Francisco hoping to begin again. Reports placed him at Bojangles, a gay dance club, before his death. Christmann had been stabbed 15 times in the front and back, and his throat had been deeply cut. He was fully clothed. His rings remained, along with personal items that included makeup and bright swimwear. Those objects weakened the easiest theory. This did not look like someone killing for jewelry or cash and fleeing in panic. The attack itself appeared to be the point. Police believed Christmann was gay, although members of his family later questioned how confidently anyone could define that part of his life. The uncertainty should remain. An investigation can show where a man went, and whom police thought he met. It cannot always settle how he understood himself. For the pattern, the more important question was how the assailant perceived him. An attacker selecting men in gay bars or cruising areas needed only to decide that Christmann fit the group he was seeking. 3 men had now been killed in less than 6 months. The press began discussing a possible series, but detectives still lacked the clean link a courtroom would demand. No murder weapon had been recovered. There was no surveillance video, phone location data, or searchable DNA database. Sand, wind, water, vegetation, animals, and passing strangers could disturb the scenes before evidence was collected. Even preserved material could not yield in 1974 what a modern laboratory might attempt today. The investigation also moved through a city where many gay men had powerful reasons to avoid police. Same-sex intimacy remained criminalized under California law until 1976. Being identified publicly could cost a man his job, housing, marriage, family ties, or professional standing. San Francisco had a visible gay community, but visibility did not guarantee safety. Years of police harassment and discriminatory enforcement had also created deep distrust. That pressure changed the mechanics of the case. Detectives needed people to admit they had seen a victim leave a bar, met a young artist, or survived an encounter they had never told anyone about. Every answer could expose the witness as well as the offender. Silence protected careers and families. It also protected whoever was attacking the men. Homicide inspectors Rotia Guilford and Earl Sanders were eventually assigned to the investigations. The 2 pioneering black detectives were sometimes called the Soul Brothers inside the department. That matters because the usual summary, police on one side and the gay community on the other, is too simple. Guilford and Sanders pursued the murders seriously, but they represented an institution many potential witnesses did not trust. Their problem was not that no information existed. It was that the information arrived in fragments, often without anyone willing to carry it into open court. After Christmann's death, the visible series stopped for 10 months. No record can tell us whether the attacker paused, traveled, changed his behavior, or harmed someone whose case was never connected. Then the violence returned in the spring of 1975, first in a form that did not look like the same series at all. On April 27, 52-year-old attorney Warren Andrews was found unconscious at Land's End. He had been struck in the head with a rock and a tree branch. Investigators recovered a bloody rock, a branch, and a blood-spattered handkerchief. Andrews never regained consciousness. He died about 7 weeks later. At the time, the attack did not fit neatly beside a group of stabbings. It was handled first as a violent assault, not as one event in a serial homicide investigation. That choice affected how the case was categorized, preserved, and remembered. Decades later, cold case investigators reconsidered the location, victim profile, timing, and intensity of the attack. San Francisco police now believe Andrews may have been a 6th Doodler victim, but they have not presented that link as proven. The change in weapon made the link possible, but harder to prove. A serial offender can use whatever is available, and a rock or branch may have replaced a knife. Similar geography and victim profiles still cannot establish one attacker by themselves. Some evidence from the Andrews case has also been difficult to locate, narrowing what modern testing can answer. His inclusion makes the pattern broader. It also makes the pattern less certain. 2 weeks after Andrews was attacked, another body appeared on Ocean Beach. Frederick Capin was 32, a registered nurse and former Navy medical corpsman who had served in Vietnam. His record included recognition for courage under fire. He was also an artist. Family photographs and surviving accounts show a life built from medical discipline, creativity, and service. Capin had reportedly told relatives that San Francisco was becoming dangerous. He had considered returning to Washington state. On May 12, 1975, Capin was found near the foot of Vicente Street. He had been stabbed 16 times, with fatal wounds to the heart and aorta. Marks in the sand showed that his body had been dragged about 20 feet. He was wearing a brightly colored shirt and a blue corduroy jacket. The drag marks mattered. They meant Capin had been moved during or after the assault. Perhaps the attacker wanted to reduce the body's visibility. Perhaps the struggle began elsewhere. Perhaps the movement served a purpose police never understood. Whatever the reason, it created a measurable path across the sand. For a moment, the scene held movement rather than only aftermath. Then wind, footsteps, and the beach itself began erasing it. Capin's death reinforced the strongest parts of the pattern: repeated stabbing, wounds to the front and back, gay male victims, and locations along the city's western recreation and cruising areas. Police still did not have a witness who could place one attacker with the dead. That would soon change, but not at another murder scene. On June 4, 1975, workers found 66-year-old Harald Gullberg in thick brush near Lincoln Park and Land's End. His body had been there for roughly 10 days or longer. Decomposition limited what the medical examiner could determine, but records described knife wounds and injuries consistent with the broader series. Gullberg was older than the other recognized victims. He was a Swedish immigrant and more isolated in the surviving public record. He did not fit a tidy portrait of a preferred target. Yet the location, timing, and violence kept him inside the developing case. His death also showed the danger of making the pattern too narrow. The offender, if one man committed these crimes, may have chosen opportunity more often than a precise age or social type. By early summer 1975, detectives were looking at 5 recognized deaths: Cavanagh, Stevens, Christmann, Capin, and Gullberg. Andrews would be added as a likely 6th victim decades later. The dead could show investigators where the violence ended. They could not explain how the meetings began. In July, 2 men survived long enough to do exactly that. The attacks happened at Fox Plaza inside the same apartment building and on the same floor about 2 weeks apart. The 2 men did not know each other. Unlike the bodies found outside, they could describe the stranger who had entered their homes. One survivor said he met a young man after the bars closed at the truck stop, a late-night diner near Market Street. The stranger was slim, attractive, and black, apparently in his early 20s. He drew animals on a paper napkin and said he attended art school and wanted to become a cartoonist. The survivor had an art background and thought the drawings showed real ability. That small performance may have been the most effective tool in the entire case. A man drawing animals at a diner did not appear threatening. He looked creative, observant, and easy to talk to. The pictures gave the stranger a reason to watch another man's face without seeming intrusive. They turned a late-night conversation into trust. The survivor eventually invited him back to Fox Plaza. According to the account later given to investigators, the guest stayed in the bathroom for an unusually long time. When he came out, he attacked the survivor from behind with a steak knife. The blade broke. The injured man turned, fought back, forced the attacker away, and lived. Roughly 2 weeks later, another man on the same floor was attacked. Historical accounts describe him being threatened and restrained before noise or intervention from nearby residents disrupted the assault. He survived as well. 2 unrelated residents, 1 hallway, 2 similar encounters. That was no longer an abstract pattern on a map. It was a man entering homes. Fox Plaza gave detectives what the beach scenes could not: time with the attacker. One survivor had watched him draw, heard his story about art school, taken him home, and fought him at close range. In October 1975, the survivor sat with homicide inspectors and helped create a composite sketch. The face became the public image of the Doodler, a young black man, tall and slender, with high cheekbones, wide-set eyes, and a knit cap. The nickname came from the reported drawing at the diner. It was memorable enough to spread through newspapers and later retellings. But the name carried more certainty than the evidence beneath it. What did the sketch actually prove? It depicted the Fox Plaza attacker. Police believed that man also committed the coastal murders, and the similarities were serious enough to investigate. Yet modern detectives have acknowledged that the bridge between the 2 groups of crimes has never been publicly established beyond doubt. The face people call the Doodler may be the face of the killer. It may also be the face of an attempted murderer whose connection to the bodies remains unproved. Historical reports also described another survivor, sometimes identified only as a prominent actor or entertainer, who escaped a possible attack after noticing a knife. His identity was protected, and parts of the original documentation have been difficult to locate. The important point is simpler than the legend. Police believed other men had encountered the same assailant and survived, but the surviving accounts did not all carry the same evidentiary weight. Some survivors were reportedly unwilling to testify publicly. That decision has often been reduced to a story about famous or successful men protecting their reputations. In 1975, the stakes were larger. Open testimony could end a career, expose a marriage, invite prosecution, or cut a man off from his family. A reviver could fight for his life, speak privately to detectives, and help create a sketch, yet still be unable to describe the meeting from a witness stand. That left police with a brutal legal problem. A private identification could point them toward a suspect, but it could not replace admissible testimony or physical evidence. If the witnesses would not appear, detectives needed something from the bodies to tie the same man to the murders. Without it, the case could sound persuasive inside an interview room and still fail in court. Then the sketch produced something police had not expected, the same name arriving from several directions. An anonymous woman called twice within about 10 days. She gave police a man's name and a vehicle license plate. Investigators have never publicly identified her. At least 2 other people later supplied the same name. That repetition did not prove guilt, but it pushed the tip far beyond a random accusation. Historical reporting adds a more complicated lead. An East Bay psychiatrist reportedly contacted police and said he believed one of his patients might be responsible. Accounts from the period suggested that the patient had made statements the doctor considered incriminating. The exact words, circumstances, and clinical context have never been released in enough detail for outsiders to judge them. It is unclear what came directly from the patient and what came through the psychiatrist's interpretation. A disturbed statement is not automatically a confession. Internal conflict about sexuality is not evidence of murder, and mental illness cannot stand in for a forensic link. Investigators would need details only the offender could know, proof that those details had not already been public, and independent evidence placing the speaker with the victims. No such complete public chain has emerged. Homicide inspectors interviewed the man named by the callers in January 1976. They considered him a strong suspect. He denied involvement, and he was not arrested. Police have never publicly named him. He remains a person of interest, not a convicted offender. Later reporting placed him in the East Bay and said he was still alive. Cold case investigators questioned him again after the investigation was renewed. He continued to deny responsibility. The case against him has weight. Several people independently gave police the same name. A psychiatrist's warning reportedly pointed in that direction. Investigators believe at least one Fox Plaza survivor identified his attacker. The known killing stopped after the man realized police were looking at him. Taken together, those facts create a near answer. They do not close it. The weaknesses are just as real. Tipsters may repeat the same rumor. A sincere identification may still be wrong. A psychiatrist's report may be incomplete or impossible to use. A murder series can stop because an offender moves, dies, is jailed for another crime, loses opportunity, changes method, or simply stops. The timing after the police interview is suggestive. It is not proof. Cold case investigators have also pursued DNA testing, and according to reporting on the renewed inquiry, obtained a sample from the person of interest. No result has been publicly announced that ties him to the killings. That silence does not tell us whether testing excluded him or failed to produce a usable profile. The work may remain incomplete, or the evidence may be too degraded to answer the question. Without an official result, each possibility remains only a possibility. Before police settled their attention on one unnamed man, another suspect appeared to carry something more powerful than a resemblance. Property connected to Frederick Capin, On November 20, 1975, an officer stopped a man who resembled the composite. He carried a shortened wooden bat and a large curved knife. In his possession was a pawn slip linked to Capin's watch. For a moment, the investigation seemed to have moved from a drawing to an object belonging to a victim. Then the link broke. Investigators believed the watch had been stolen from Capin's apartment before the murder. It could therefore have passed through other hands without the stopped man ever meeting him. The man also failed to match other parts of the case, including the reported artistic skill. The clue was dramatic. Its chain of possession was not strong enough. Other men were questioned. One reportedly carried both a sketchbook and a butcher knife. More than a dozen people entered the investigation at different points. None gave detectives the full combination they needed. They still lacked a reliable identification, a workable timeline, and physical evidence tying the same person to the homicides rather than to a suspicious object or a similar face. The published sketch created its own danger. It could trigger recognition, but it could also reshape memory. A witness might begin remembering the printed face rather than the man he had actually seen. Tips could reflect the image instead of an independent encounter. Every young black man with a slim build, a knit cap, or an interest in drawing risked becoming suspicious by resemblance alone. Detectives had to search aggressively without turning race, clothing, and occupation into a verdict. The investigation was also competing with a violent city. San Francisco recorded more than 100 homicides in some years of that period. Detectives faced other serial crimes, political conflict, and rapidly changing neighborhoods. Reports sat under separate case numbers, sometimes waiting for one inspector to recognize the importance of a detail written down by another. That context does not erase mistakes. It shows how mistakes became permanent. Warren Andrews' assault was not initially folded into the series. Evidence was stored under systems never designed for DNA testing decades later. Witnesses died, disappeared, or became difficult to locate. Some medical and police records were lost or survived only as summaries. When modern investigators tried to reconstruct the psychiatrist's call, the person who made it could no longer explain exactly what had been said. Stigma did more than shape the headlines. It shaped who walked into a police station, who agreed to be named, and who decided that silence was safer. These men were not killed because being gay made them careless. An assailant may have chosen places where gay men sought company because privacy and fear gave him cover. The same pressure that kept a meeting discreet could erase a witness from the case the next morning. Read the victims' names together, and the loss becomes harder to flatten into a pattern. Gerald Cavanagh had served in wartime and spent years doing factory work. Jae Stevens brought music, comedy, and drag performance to San Francisco stages. Klaus Christmann was trying to build a new life while his wife and children remained in Europe. Frederick Capin had treated wounded service members in Vietnam before becoming a civilian nurse. Harald Gullberg was an older Swedish immigrant whose last years survive only in fragments. Warren Andrews was an attorney whose possible place in the series was recognized decades after his death. The cases were never perfectly uniform. Their ages varied. Andrews was beaten rather than stabbed. The bodies appeared at Ocean Beach, Golden Gate Park, Land's End, and nearby brush. The similarities were strong enough to keep one investigation alive, but not clean enough to remove every doubt. That uncertainty also matters when counting victims. Older retellings sometimes claim totals far above the 6 deaths, now emphasized by San Francisco police. The public evidence supports 5 historically linked murders and Andrews as a likely 6th. Anything beyond that remains unproved. The modern investigation has moved by rebuilding the old one. Detectives reviewed old reports and compared the coastal murders with the Fox Plaza assaults. And they returned to the unnamed person of interest and produced age-progressed images of the young man in the knit cap. In 2023, the reward rose to $250,000. In June 2026, San Francisco police again publicized the reward and said the case remained active. Investigators asked to hear from anyone who knew the suspect, survived a similar assault, or remembered the woman who called twice with a name and license plate. A fact that felt too dangerous to reveal in 1975 may be safer to explain now. Investigators have also examined whether the person of interest traveled outside the United States, including through parts of the southeastern United States. That can test opportunity. It does not create a national series. No public record has established a chain of Doodler murders across the country. The central contradiction is now sharper than ever. Police appear confident that one particular man was involved in the Fox Plaza attacks. They have long believed those assaults were connected to the bodies along the city's western edge. But the public record still does not show the bridge between those two groups of crimes. Did detectives identify one offender responsible for both, or did the face of an attempted murderer become attached to a separate homicide series? Look closely at what actually survives. No paper napkin has been identified as evidence. There is a witness account of a stranger drawing animals and calling himself a cartoonist. The composite sketch is real, but it depicts the Fox Plaza attacker. The anonymous calls are real, but the caller's knowledge and motives remain unknown. The person of interest is real, but the case publicly described against him remains circumstantial and incomplete. Even the nickname compresses all of those uncertain links into one memorable word. To cross that gap, investigators need more than another resemblance. A survivor's identification would have to remain reliable after 5 decades. Preserved evidence would have to produce a usable forensic match with an intact chain of custody. The psychiatrist's report would need corroboration. The suspect's movements would need to align with the deaths. Above all, police would have to connect the man who drew animals in a diner to the man who left victims near the beach, the park, and the cliffs. For the families, those distinctions do not make the waiting easier. Some relatives learned private parts of the men's lives through police reports or newspapers. Others watched decades pass while the person discussed in the investigation grew old outside a courtroom. Time removes witnesses, weakens memory, degrades evidence, and makes every surviving document more valuable at the same moment it becomes more fragile. The case still has assets. The original and age-progressed sketches may trigger recognition. Someone may remember the anonymous woman making those calls, or hearing her say she had contacted police. Old photographs, address books, school records, employment files, letters, and travel documents could place the person of interest somewhere important. None would need to contain a confession to change the weight of the case. But 4 barriers remain. No publicly confirmed forensic match connects the person of interest to a murder scene. The bridge between Fox Plaza and the homicides is still unproved. Important witnesses and tipsters were anonymous, reluctant, lost, or deceased, and the strongest person of interest has denied involvement and has never been charged. Police may believe they know the man. A jury would still need to hear how police know. Which witness can identify him? Which object connects him to a victim? And did that evidence survive 50 years? That is why the case can feel one step from an answer while remaining legally open. The first anonymous voice still hangs over the investigation. The caller knew exactly where police should go on Ocean Beach. The tide was rising. He would not give his name. After Gerald Cavanagh came Jae Stevens beside a tree in Golden Gate Park and Klaus Christmann on the beach. Then came Frederick Capin, dragged across the sand, Harald Gullberg, hidden in coastal brush, and Warren Andrews, unconscious at Land's End. Then 2 men survived inside Fox Plaza. One remembered the drawings. One face came a sketch. Several callers gave police the same name. The sketch is still public. The name is still withheld. The man police interviewed is still uncharged. Somewhere between the payphone, the paper napkin, the Fox Plaza hallway, and the evidence preserved from the western edge of San Francisco lies the line investigators have never crossed. The line between believing they found the Doodler and proving it.